A 4D hypersphere suggests a higher dimensional realm from which our familiar 3D world is merely a slice or a shadow. Mathematically, a hypersphere is a sphere generalized to higher dimensions. For instance, a sphere's surface is a 2D curved space, while a 4D hypersphere's surface is a 3D curved space, akin to a closed universe. We can visualize this idea using concepts like a Klein bottle, a non-orientatable surface where the inside and outside seamlessly merge, suggesting how higher dimensions could connect seemingly separate realities. When applied to consciousness, the concept of a 4D rotating Klein bottle implies a profound idea. Consciousness may not be restricted to the present moment in an ordinary spacetime, but rather extends within a higher dimensional structure that forms the basis of our experience of time, self, and potentially transcendental state. In physics, we already deal with a four-dimensional reality. Einstein's relativity combines 3D space and 1D time into a unified 4D space-time. In that sense, every particle or person isn't just a 3D object, but a 4D world line, stretching from birth to death through time. A few thinkers have suggested that our consciousness might actually correspond to awareness of this world line, not just the instantaneous 3D slice. For example, Bernard Carr, a physicist and consciousness researcher, argues that what we perceive as the flow of time might be our mind moving along or projecting onto our 4D existence. He notes that according to relativity, the arena of reality is a four-dimensional space-time, and thus perception is a 4D process, with the brain just being one end of the causal chain. In this view, conscious experience is associated with all the parts of space-time to which the brain is linked via signals. It's as if the mind is not inside the head, but rather the head, or brain, is a localized receiver or nexus for a much larger matrix of consciousness that spans through time and space. One immediate implication of this model is quite provocative. It suggests that memory might not be stored as bits inside brain tissue, but rather that the brain acts as an access key to a part of the 4D space-time where the past event lies. Instead of containing a full record of every event, the brain may contain a tag rather than a trace, linking our consciousness to the original event's coordinates in space-time. This idea, while speculative, elegantly explains certain puzzles, like the elusive physical anagram of memory, and fits with reports of extraordinary experiences. Some near-death experiences, for example, describe witnessing their life as a panoramic 4D view rather than as a scrambled recall, suggesting consciousness can access time dimension in a non-linear way. And a tag or a key rather than event in our brain, when we forget a memory, who hasn't lost their keys? Going beyond the fourth dimension, Bernard Carr and others who have been influenced by thinkers like C.D. Broad and J.B. Priestley from earlier in the 20th century have proposed models with multiple time dimensions. Carr's recent writing posits that one needs a second time dimension to fully account for consciousness. One time dimension, T1, for the physical world and another T2 for the flow of mental events. In such a five-dimensional reality, 4D space and one time, our phenomenal space-time, the world as experience, is a different slice of reality than the physical space-time scientists measure. This could address questions like, why do I experience now at this particular junction of my world line? If my whole life is a 4D object, what confers the feeling of moving through it? By invoking an extra dimension for consciousness, Carr suggests that personal identity and the subjective now might be defined in that higher space. While highly theoretical, such models show that scientists are actively grappling with how to fit consciousness into our model of the universe in a principled way. It's reminiscent of how adding a fourth spatial dimension can solve certain puzzles. Perhaps by lifting the consciousness problem into a higher dimensional framework, some entanglements between mind and matter become easier to understand. In this model, consciousness would also operate on a Klein bottle, or a non-orientatable surface that seamlessly turns inside and out. It offers a mechanism for how consciousness experiences and evolves. In this model, the inside and outside of the Klein bottle represent different but continuous aspects of consciousness: the subjective inner world and the objective outer reality. The very nature of the Klein bottle, where a path traced along its surface eventually returns to its starting point but inverted, illustrates the cyclical and recursive nature of experience. When consciousness encounters an experiential reference, a thought, a sensation, or an external event, it navigates the Klein bottle. The flow of time isn't a linear progression, but a journey along the bottle's twists and turns. As consciousness moves, it flips from an internal to an external perspective, from a past memory to a present perception, all within the continuous fabric of the Klein bottle universe. This continuous inversion and reorientation through space-time dimensions is the mechanism through which we experience the progression of movements, even though all temporal instances might, from a higher dimensional perspective, coexist simultaneously on the bottle's other surface. Evolution occurs as consciousness constantly reorients itself on the Klein bottle. New experiences don't just add to linear timeline, they cause consciousness to navigate different pathways on the bottle, creating new internal connections and external interpretations. In essence, the Klein bottle provides a dynamic, self-referential structure where consciousness experiences time through its own continuous, interwoven movement across internal and external landscapes, constantly reshaping itself through the very act of experiencing. It's worth noting that many religious and mystical systems effectively invoke higher dimensional realities. For example, in Kabbalah, there are multiple worlds or dimensions of being. In Theosophy, 7 planes of existence. In Hindu philosophy, lokas and the idea that the Atman, self, is beyond the physical plane. These can be seen as attempts to articulate a hyperspatial reality of consciousness. And of course, there's plenty of others. There's heaven and hell in Christianity as well. While those aren't scientific models, of course, they resonate with the notion that our 3D world is nested in or pervaded by a larger reality. In physics, the idea of extra dimensions has concrete motivations, such as string theory's hidden spatial dimensions or the 4D curvature of space in cosmology. If our 3D universe were the surface of a 4D hypersphere, it would mean if you travel far enough in one direction in space, you might loop around and come back, like circumventing a globe. Some cosmologists have indeed considered that space might be finite, curved like that. In physics, the idea of extra dimensions has concrete motivations, such as string theory's hidden spatial dimensions or the 4D curvature of space in cosmology. So let's ground this for a second. Imagine your life as a world line in space-time, essentially a long, wiggly thread in a 4D block. From within your consciousness, you experience as moving along the thread moment by moment. But from a 4D outside view, the entire thread exists. Now, if there's a higher order structure or a pattern that links different parts of that thread, say significant events that form meaningful sequence, you as a 3D cross-section might only see isolated incidents. However, from the 4D vantage point, those incidents are adjacent or connected along a higher dimension of meaning. So if you have a string that goes along, and you lift up the string, you might still experience that as a linear pattern, but somebody from the 4D looks at that and sees that these 2 points are actually more closely related than these points down here. This analogy might help explain how synchronicities could be arranged. If one's psyche extends into the 4D, it would pick up on something in the future or another place in that larger gestalt and generate a symbol or intuition in the present, which then coincides with the actual event when it comes. In effect, the psyche is a 4D antenna rather than a 3D computer, sensitively resonating with patterns in a higher domain. It's speculative, but it provides a conceptual scaffolding for how precognition, telepathy, or intense synchronicities occur without defying physics. In sum, the 4D hypersphere Klein bottle concept in consciousness studies serves as a way to visualize the holistic, all-at-once nature of reality that both quantum physics and Jungian psychology seem to be hinting at. It tells us that the separation we sense between minds, between moments, between mind and matter, may not be absolute. And if we had a God's eye view in a higher dimension, we might see a grand unity where we now see fragments. Whether in Bernard Carr's formal model with an extra time dimension or in an image of the self as a hypersphere, the message is that consciousness might be far less limited by space and time than we assume.